Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Razan Pereira. US President Donald Trump has said that the Taliban could possibly overrun the United States-backed Afghan government after foreign troops withdraw from the country as part of a deal signed at the end of February. Countries have to take care of themselves, Trump told reporters at the White House on Friday. You can only hold someone's hand for so long, is what he added. The US-Taliban deal signed in Qatar's capital on February 29th would see US and NATO forces completely withdraw over a 14-month timeline to end the 18-year-long Afghanistan war. Asked if the Taliban could eventually seize power from the current US-backed government, Trump said it is not supposed to happen that way, but it possibly will. Trump's statement came hours after nearly 30 people were killed in the capital Kabul during an attack claimed by the ISIS group. It was the deadliest attack in Afghanistan since the signing of the US-Taliban peace deal. On this edition of India's World, we will analyze the fluid situation in Afghanistan. Joining me on the program today are Pramit Pal Chowdhury, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times, Prabhu Dayal, former Ambassador, and Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. General, let me begin the program with you. How would you look and analyze the situation in Afghanistan post the signing of the Pact or the peace deal?
You see, initially I was under the impression that regardless of what President Trump says and the deal has been signed, the American troops are likely to stick on. Because in my view, the way we had analyzed it was that the Taliban is not going to stick to the deal and then they will attack. Now, we have seen that attack coming in where 32 odd people have actually been killed in Kabul. While the Taliban has claimed that it has got nothing to do with the attack, the point is they would have been aware of what is happening, though the Islamic State has, as of now, claimed that attack. You see, but the question is, after that, when President Trump has actually given his statement now, I am actually getting to the view that regardless of what happens in Afghanistan, the United States is determined to move out. And once the President of the United States says that we can't hold hands, we can only hold hands up to a certain extent, I think that certainly is a cause of concern. And I think as far as India is concerned, it is not good news. That is one point. But let me take it to the other extreme. What happens if the Americans actually pull out? Can the Afghan National Security Forces, that is both the armed forces and the police forces, can they hold on? Now, I have always maintained the view that it is a reasonably competent force and they can hold on. But the problem is not the force holding on. The problem is they don't have the money to maintain a force of this size. There are about 300,000 people in the ANSF. And the Afghanistan government does not have the money to pay and maintain such a large force. Now, will this funding continue post the withdrawal of the American and other forces there? Now, if the funding continues, then in my view, they will be able to hold on.
Okay.
But if the funding starts getting reduced, then I'm afraid this national security force of Afghanistan is going to crumble. And then we are going to see a civil war-like situation develop. So I would really place my bets on, say, looking into a civil war within 2 to 3 years from now, by which again we get on to two factions, which existed earlier. Like we will have something like the Northern Alliance, and then we will have the Taliban at the other end. And at some point of time, well, whoever controls Kabul will really be ruling, but it will be a civil war-like situation. In this situation, I do not think India has got a very major role to play. We cannot enter into that battle. We don't have any access. Now, Pakistan, being a border state and bordering Afghanistan, I think the Taliban has a huge advantage because it gets support. It will get all military, moral, physical, and financial support from Pakistan to counter the Afghan regime.
Sure.
And I think that becomes a very serious source of concern. So ultimately, as President Trump said, he hopes it doesn't happen, but the Taliban is likely to take over. So if the President of the United States has made that statement, then I presume he's accepting it as a fait accompli.
Right.
And he's still prepared to withdraw.
Right.
So we should actually look into the situation that, okay, they have withdrawn, there is a civil war-like situation, and now what should India do?
Sure. Okay. What should India do? We'll come to that in just a bit. But since the General brought up Pakistan as well, and since you served in Pakistan, Ambassador, I must ask you this. Pakistan is leaving no stone unturned to ensure that it keeps India out of the equation in Afghanistan. The foreign minister, in fact, came out with a statement and said that we are playing spoilsport in Kabul. Now, how do we deal with the situation where Pakistan is trying to keep us out of Afghanistan?
Well, frankly, we always expected that Pakistan would do its best to keep us out. You referred to the Pakistan foreign minister. His statement just a few days ago in the Pakistani Senate was that they would not like to see India having any role in the security situation in Afghanistan. Now, quite frankly, what has been signed is not a peace deal. It is a managed US exit. Donald Trump has been trying to achieve the exit of US troops in terms of his election pledge, and he has done so quite successfully. At the same time, the agreement provides that the Taliban will not allow anti-US forces to use Afghan territory against the United States. So he seems again to be acting in accordance with what the US interests are. You may recall that the US had bombed the Taliban out from Afghanistan because they had refused to hand over Osama bin Laden, and they had not cooperated with the Americans post the 9/11 attack on America. Now, Pakistan is the spoiler in this entire game. Pakistan is the benefactor of the Taliban, and it would like to see the Taliban in power. Now, this entire process has been worked out in such a shabby manner that the Afghan government is totally not on board. If you notice, the agreement provides that 5,000 Taliban prisoners and 1,000 prisoners of the Afghan security forces would be released by March 10, and that the intra-Afghan talks will start on March 10. Now, the Afghan government in Kabul has said that they never were a party to this agreement, and that any release of prisoners should not be a prerequisite to the talks, rather it should emerge from the peace talks. So this has hardly been a peace deal. It is not accepted by all the parties involved. And in this situation, what should India do? I think we should wait and watch, but it is equally important that we should try and strengthen the security apparatus of the Afghan government.
Right.
Because ultimately they have to deal with the Taliban.
Sure. We'll talk about that in a little more detail in just ahead. But let me get something out of Pramit as well. You know, as far as the US establishment and how is it looking at this situation in Afghanistan, is it likely to play out as far as the election is concerned as well?
So as others have mentioned, this is an overriding Trump electoral promise. It was part of what he campaigned when he was elected 4 years ago, and he's determined that he will be able to go before his constituency and say, I promise that I would withdraw from a war. He's been trying to withdraw from a number of different military engagements, and this is the evidence that I have. So what we have in effect is a two-part exit. The first part is a roughly 4,000 troop withdrawal that must happen before November, before the US presidential election. The bulk of the US troops, about 8,000 plus, will only be withdrawn after November. So in effect, it depends on who wins the election to see whether or not the second part of the agreement ever actually comes into play. But for Trump, it's, I need to have an agreement that allows me to pull back several thousand troops and claim in November or through November that I am doing this. I'm bringing your boys home, and I'm ending the wastage of about $50 billion a year on a war that nobody wants.
And what is the Democrats' take on all of this?
The Democrats have made it clear that while they don't, most of them, I mean, Obama also wanted to withdraw. None of them, however, support, at least definitely not Biden, the mainstream Democrat, though Sanders is very similar in many ways to Trump's position, that they will not withdraw unless they're absolutely certain about the consequences. In other words, they will not withdraw in a manner that leaves Afghanistan defenseless, that does not take into consideration the views of other countries. and definitely not one that results in potential Al-Qaeda or Islamic State coming back in Afghanistan in a way. That's what stopped Obama from eventually being able to leave Afghanistan, because he could never get that agreement or sense that he could provide for the security of Afghanistan. Biden, who is almost a carbon copy of Obama in almost every way, including his staff, I think will continue. We wish to withdraw. We will continue to reduce the American footprint, but we will never completely pull out as long as we have an absolute guarantee that America's security will not be endangered. Sanders is, I said, more or less like Trump. Let's just pull out, not out of here, but almost everywhere. America is again overextended in terms of its military positioning overseas. So that's what we'll see what happens in November. Depending on who wins in November, we'll see whether the second half or the second part of the agreement is actually implemented. The Washington establishment is dead opposed to the agreement. The Pentagon, the intelligence agencies, Homeland Security believe that America should be there. Even the bulk of the Republican Party supports the American presence. Their argument is that America now only loses somewhere between 10 and 20 soldiers a year in Afghanistan. The cost is a little high, so perhaps you could argue that the amount of money being spent should be trimmed. But the troop presence being reduced to, let's say, 6,000 or so on as a counterterrorism operation, rather than a giant insurgency operation or a nation-building exercise, is perfectly within the capabilities of the United States to maintain.
Okay, all right. Taking the discussion forward now, let's talk about India's role, really, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, General. The ambassador was mentioning about, wait and watch is the best option, really, because we need to see what happens in Afghanistan and how things turn out. But in the meantime, of course, this has been a long time coming. We've known that we could reach this particular juncture. What do we need to do in the immediate near future?
Actually, the way I've looked at it is we really don't have too many options. One of the things which we have been saying is please keep supporting the Afghan National Security Forces. Please keep supporting the Afghan government. Now, we have spent close to $3 billion in developmental aid. We built their parliament, we built roads, we built hospitals. And when you're looking at Afghanistan per se, if you speak to the common Afghan on the streets, I think they hold the highest respect and goodwill for India. And when they speak about Pakistan, it's a completely reverse situation. They don't like the Pakistanis. But once the Taliban comes in, the whole situation will radically alter. Regardless of the goodwill which the public has, if the Taliban is in control, I think our ability to operate in that area comes down to practically zero. Now, in a scenario like that, if you start supporting the government forces, then the Taliban will actually take it as a hostile act. So how is India going to play that game? If it comes to a civil war, we will support the government forces. That I've got no doubts. But let us say the civil war situation hasn't been reached. Then what is the type of support which we can give? I think the best at this point of time would be, at that point of time when we reach that situation, would be to continue with development aid with both parties on board. That means if we have to, say, construct a road between 2 points or build an infrastructure facility like a hospital, then I think it should be in concurrence with both the Taliban and the Afghan government to say we are doing this and is it okay with both of you? So if then whatever we do in Afghanistan from now onwards will have to be in consultation with both the groups which are diametrically opposed to each other. In my own view, one of the things is the American withdrawal. Will it take place? I think America in its own view finds that its interests here are diminishing. No longer do the Arab states also hold any a great deal of promise for them. They don't require their energy resources anymore. So what are they doing in Afghanistan really? Now, if you're looking from Donald Trump's point of view, his point could very well be this. Listen, it is somebody else's war. Let them fight it out.
Sure.
So let the Chinese get involved, let them spend the money, let the Russians come in, let the Iranians come in. You see, why should the Americans spend their dollars in a war like this? Now, that is the way they are thinking of it, because I think now America feels it is reasonably well protected that any action by the Islamic State, by Al-Qaeda, or by any other elements on the American homeland is most unlikely.
Sure.
So with that, if that is the scenario, then I see no reason why they should be there.
Okay.
So I've got a feeling, regardless of what the general trend is, I've got a feeling after the statement of President Donald Trump that they are very, very keen and very, they want to get out.
Okay.
So our options are limited, but let's see as to how it turns out.
Okay, taking this particular point forward, Ambassador, do we start talking to the Taliban? Do we start having open conversations with them? When the peace pact, you didn't want to call it that, but when the peace pact was signed on the 29th of February, post that the Taliban did not even acknowledge India. So is that something that is also going to play on our minds?
Well, Pakistan controls the levers as far as the Taliban is concerned. And Pakistan would not like us to have any dialogue with the Taliban. It will discourage the Taliban in every manner possible. Of course, we could explore through whatever channels that are available, through whatever good friends that we have. If we can open up a dialogue and if it leads somewhere, no harm. But I don't see that as happening in the very near future. Now, how is the immediate future going to unfold? I suspect that far from there being any peace, there will in fact be bitter conflict in Afghanistan between the Taliban, backed by the Pakistanis, and the Afghan government. If you recall, the peace deal had been preceded by a week of when there was no violence. In fact, there was a let up in any kind of violence, and it was expected by the Americans that this would continue after the peace deal. But that has not happened, because on the 3rd of March, the Taliban attacked Afghan government positions. And then, of course, the Americans
there was a retaliation.
Retaliated against the Taliban positions. So the situation on the ground is very confusing, because the agreement itself makes no mention of the fact that the period of truce or the reduction in violence would continue after the peace deal. There is no mention there. Now, in this situation, the lapsing again into violence between the Taliban and the Afghan forces is bound to happen. So I come back to my original position. This is hardly a peace deal. It is just a managed US exit. It fulfills President Trump's election promises. It is in line with America's stated position of ensuring that Afghanistan is not used for anti-American activity. But as President Trump has said, he's not really bothered about what happens in Afghanistan. He was asked whether the Taliban would take over in Afghanistan, and he said that this is not the way it should happen, but this is how probably it will happen. The Americans abandoned South Vietnam, their allies. They abandoned the Kurds, and you see how the Turks went rampage. So I'm not surprised that they are abandoning,
right?
Because Trump's policy is America first, and the time I have been spending in the US in recent years has shown me that by and large, the American people go along with this position.
Right.
They also feel that America has spent far too much money in Afghanistan and lost about 2,500 lives.
As well.
And is it worth it to be fighting somebody else's war? I think by and large, the American people favor an exit. And whatever happens in Afghanistan then remains to be seen. There will be bitter conflict.
Okay, all right. So, Pramit, in a situation like this, what is the best possible outcome for India?
So for us, ultimately, is that, one, delay the American departure as long as possible. As others have mentioned, we've been expecting this for a while. During the entire 10 years of the Obama administration, Barack Obama repeatedly said he was going to withdraw, and it was held back not because of us, but because of his internal battles with his own American establishment and defense and intelligence agencies. Trump is better at bulldozing his way through the system, but right now he's in an election mode, so we'll see how far he can push or how much he's prepared to accept symbolically before November. After November, we'll start to get a better sense of what's going to happen, the actual American policy will be. Our position will be to try to delay the American departure, as I said, as long as possible, because that's in our interest. And you can see already, though, the Indian ministers, the foreign minister and others have already publicly said we understand that the Americans have taken a huge burden on their shoulders all these years, and so we understand why they're feeling tired now, preparing the way, if you wish, for an American change of American policy. We will find it difficult to rally other countries to support the Afghan National Army. The Chinese obviously will be largely with the Pakistanis, though they are actually not too happy about the American withdrawal either. The Russians now largely take the Chinese side on most things. Iran has basically taken over the northern shura of the Taliban itself, so they are now actually, their policies basically co-opt a chunk of the Taliban in preparation and have made it very clear they prefer an American withdrawal and for them a Taliban regime is a secondary concern. So you'll not find as much regional support for the Afghan National Army as there was in the past. But the ANA is more powerful than the original Kabul government was that took on the original Taliban regime. And the Taliban are, it's interesting that they're signaling towards India. They've made very few comments, but they have said, their spokesmen have said, we are not opposed to India, and India should not see us necessarily as an enemy, which indicates that there is a certain degree of, say, Pashtun nationalism within the Taliban, who would like not to be completely dependent on Pakistan in the future. It's a slightly, we'll have to see, there's a debate internally as to how different this Taliban is from the original Taliban.
Right.
And there is a sense, though, that they treat the Pakistanis with a certain degree of suspicion, other than some elements, notably the Haqqani network, which is very close to Rawalpindi directly. We have given instruments. Part of our investment, as you know, in that area is to build the Chabahar port and build a connectivity through Chabahar into Herat that allows a future Afghan government, even a Taliban regime, to maintain a degree of economic independence from Pakistan, which didn't exist before. And so that's a long-term game. We'll have to see how that plays in. But fundamentally, we will try to stop the Americans from withdrawing, delay it as long as possible, try to see whatever assistance can be provided to the Kabul regime from other elements of the international community, at least funding, perhaps Japan, the European Union, if not some other countries. Then eventually, if the Taliban do come to power, or some sort of Taliban-dominated regime, is to then try to see if we can maintain a degree of Taliban independence from Pakistan,
right,
economically or otherwise, to make them, should we say, less and less dependent, and hope that a degree of Afghan nationalism, which tends to be quite latent, powerful within the Afghans, they are ultimately people who don't like to be dependent on anybody, will convert a new Taliban regime that would be hopefully different from the earlier one.
Absolutely. All right, time now to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward, starting first with you, General.
No, I think one of the things that we need to be very, very concerned about is the fallout of an American withdrawal and Taliban takeover in Afghanistan as to what could be the potential fallout in Jammu Kashmir. And I think we need to prepare for that, because there is a sense that a large number of the fighters who were earlier fighting the Afghan army will now actually be free, and Pakistan may try to actually pump them into Kashmir. The scenario is quite different to what had happened earlier when these fighters had come in and today, because now we are very well prepared to deal with any such movement. And the first part is for these people to even enter India now is going to be very, very difficult.
Right.
And even after entering, their operational capacity is going to be restricted. So I do not consider that as a major danger, but I think we should keep that as a back of our mind. There is a potentiality.
Sure.
The second thing is, I think we have to have an outreach to the Taliban in some extent, because our developmental effort in Afghanistan, if it has to continue, it would require support from both the Afghan government, which is already there, and from the Taliban, which we need to create. If we can get both of them on board for our development effort, and as said by Mr. Chaudhary just before this, with the Chabahar coming up, Pakistan will not really be a major player as far as Afghanistan is concerned. There is a very strong sense of Afghan nationalism.
Okay.
And I think that is something which we need to support at all times.
Okay, all right, Ambassador.
Well, to my mind, it appears that the situation will be fluid for quite some time to come. All the American forces are not going to be withdrawn. From 14,000 troops, the American troops will come down to 8,600 by April 15th, June 15th.
June 15th, yeah.
Then the balance forces are to be withdrawn by end of April next year. That would give the Americans too some time to again weigh their options. Depending on how things are progressing, they could reevaluate their position. A Trump who comes into power again may be different from a Trump facing re-election. Similarly, a new US president in place of Trump, should there be one, could re-evaluate US options. So I think much water still remains to flow down all the rivers of the world before final positions can be taken.
Sure.
However, the link between Pakistan and the Taliban will remain as strong as it was. Let us not forget that the Taliban were able to fight this long battle, this 20-year-long battle almost with the Americans, because they enjoyed safe sanctuaries in Pakistan.
Sure.
So this umbilical relationship between the Taliban, which was in fact born within Pakistan, within the universities there, in northern Pakistan, and the government of Pakistan, particularly the armed forces, will continue and will be a problem. It will be a problem for us, but we are a mature nation. I'm confident we'll be able to tackle it.
Absolutely. And Pramit Pal Chaudhary, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
So I think, yeah, we should assume that there are a number of scenarios that are possible. Just on the basis of one agreement, we shouldn't assume that an American withdrawal will happen overnight. The Taliban will necessarily come to power soon after that, and therefore we will return to what the situation was when the Taliban were there first time around in the 1980s. We'll now see this play out, but remember that whether it's America, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's the Taliban, and whether it is China, which in many ways is the new external player in this game, all of these now are different in many ways, and their interests are now different, and their capacities are different. Pakistan is much weaker as a nation. Its GDP is smaller than Bangladesh.
Right.
The Chinese, on the other hand, are most concerned about stability, and I know that in their private conversations with us and other countries, they have indicated that they would actually prefer the Americans to stay, and they don't trust a Taliban regime to be when it's power and what it will do to them and their interests. So you have a different set of game. You have the same players, but a very different set of priorities and capacities.
Sure.
And we have to make sure we understand that and play our cards accordingly.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap in this edition of India as well. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. Our email ID is indiaaswell.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it from me. See you again next time.